protocol. And you know, that just, I think he's right. He's really onto something there. I'm surprised that more, maybe I'm ignorant of it, but I'd say I'm surprised that more organizations haven't like run with projects like that to instantiate the Burning Man ethos elsewhere. I know it's inspired a lot of projects, but to actively embed it, I think is super exciting. So I'm going to be listening today.
Oh, I love that point that there's a lot to learn from it, and there is a design, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Tucker talks about that. But we'll have Simon and then whoever else just joined us go next, and Tucker will round out the introductions.
Yeah, really nice to meet you guys. My name is Simon. I'm a second time burner so far, planning to go this year too. And, personally, I've been just become really interested in the, what people call the meaning crisis of the modern age, right? There's a series I started to watch and actually have a book club around, it's called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by this guy, John Vervaeke. And in general, I'm just interested in the intersection of, philosophy, spirituality, and then very importantly also kind of, enacted or experiential learning and insights like movement, psychedelics, experimentation, all that stuff. And I actually think, Lisa, your point was really good. Is I think there's a magical component to Burning Man culture that I think the world at large needs, and so I'm here to discuss that. And yeah, Spacious and I we met at Camp Contact last year. So nice to meet you all.
Glad you could join us, Tripwire. Tucker, let's round us out.
Hey everyone, I'm Tucker. I've been to Burning Man the past 2 years. I'm about to go to the Eclipse Festival in Austin, which I'm excited about. And yeah, I have been with the Metamodern Magicians and that Daryl invited me into, and I felt really grateful to have a place at Burning Man to kind of like hold the flag of the liminal web world, small but mighty. And I've just been really inspired by Burning Man, in part because I feel like it actually is a polarity for a lot of my tendencies in life, which is to take life kind of seriously, to kind of try to like fix things, and maybe to feel like I need to sort of show up in some sort of special way or something like that. And Burning Man is just kind of this place where everything is already insanely magical. And there's just this like flow of celebration and play and joy, and also a lot of some of the most difficult days of the past couple of years I've had were at Burning Man. So I feel like it's a good example of really sinking into how special and beautiful and magical and surreal and challenging and difficult and painful life is. And in that way, it feels like one of the best anthropological and experiential and mystical and very human experiences one can have to kind of maybe grapple with the beautiful complexity and pure simplicity of being a human in this life. So I'll pass it back to Spacious, aka Daryl.
Yeah, let's see. All right, I'll get these slides going here, and we'll just kind of run down the burner principles, kind of how they intersect with what ChatGPT told me were metamodern and liminal web principles. Yeah, Burning Man it's not just a festival. It's not just a party. There's a lot of content there. There's a lot of movers and shakers. There's a lot of people trying to make connections that are making connections. A lot of business deals and busyness deals. A lot of ways that people decide to do things. And to that end, there's a lot of meshing or like alignment with kind of the metamodern startups thing that we're doing here. We're trying to do something new and different. We're trying to like explore. We're trying to experiment. And it's I think why I gravitate to both spaces so much. And I'm going to present button. should be a little better here. Yeah, so these principles were made in 2004 by Larry Harvey. They're not dictating, they're principles. They're things to think about. Some of them conflict with one another. And they may want to change. They may want to evolve and be added onto. But inclusion is huge. Anyone can be a part of Burning Man. And Metamodern certainly advocates for inclusivity and openness to diverse perspectives, and it recognizes the complexity of multiplicity of truth. This idea of categories and identities and inclusivity is celebrated. Gifting is a big part of Burning Man. There's not commerce there per se. It's the gift economy. People give for giving's sake. It's not barter. I'm not sure that metamodernism specifically is about gifting, but it is about connections and how those connections are fostered, and it is about building community. So yeah, Burning Man's not a commercial environment. There's no sponsorships per se. And gifting is not required. Again, there's no expectation that anything be returned if a gift is received. Burning Man is about decommodification. We don't have sponsorships. There's not a transactional culture so much. Certainly it happens, and certainly there's parts of it, but we want participatory experience. And I would say, yeah, Metamodern is certainly trying to really explore capitalism and deconstruct it, or outcompete capitalism. I would say Burning Man, if we paid for the experience we get at it, it would be way more expensive than, say, the cost of the ticket, the cost of joining a camp, perhaps, the cost of what we bring to it. And I think there is a way that Burning Man does a great job of outcompeting capitalism. And yeah, the Liminal Web certainly questions capitalism. And it's not so much that capitalism is always bad, but this idea of the Moloch that emerges because of capitalism. And are there other ways of doing kind of a green capitalism, or a more shared, less consumerist, less exploitative, less extractive capitalism that maybe wants to happen as inspired by Burning Man principles. All right, let's see what's next here. Radical self-reliance. It's important for people to know how to take care of themselves at Burning Man. It's a rough terrain, and in the end, we're responsible for ourselves. I'm not sure I've seen specific things from Metamodern or Liminal Web about what they say, but there is certainly some idea of radical self-reliance and responsibility and individual agency within I think the Liminal Web space. Radical self-expression. This is all the outfits and lovely things that you see on Instagram about Burning Man. And it's a chance to try on different ways of being and have different ways of identifying different avatars. And I think this is huge within Metamodern realm, that we have different ways of being, and we have different perspectives, and they may conflict as well. I personally, I don't know. Yeah, this is where I'm very intrigued by internal family systems. It's my own thing that I'm digging into right now, that I think about when I see this. And how does internal family systems as a metamodern therapy perhaps show things? But I digress. Let's see what's next here. Here's some fun radical self-expression examples that I picked out last night. Communal effort. This is a huge one for Burning Man. We work together to make things happen. We're not relying on Sherpas. We're not relying on other people that are paid, or that are somehow less than us or contracted. We all make what happens together at Burning Man through shared creativity and coordination, collaboration. And certainly metamodernism is all about the interconnectedness, and all these graphs that we're doing in the Limicon at the beginning, and the liminal web certainly is a web. It is a web. So they're both webs. And having collective action, having all of these gather town meetups and all the rest that make metamodernism happen, the liminal web happen, kind of go along with that. Here's a bunch of tired people at the end of a burn, but they're all got smiles on their face from a burn well done. Civic responsibility is a big part. This is not anarchy. This is not so much that that there is order. It's just not the order we're used to seeing. And there is decentralization in this, and certainly there's ways in the liminal web that there's freedom and there is ethical action and social responsibility in navigating the complexities of the contemporary world. Leaving no trace certainly goes along well with the meta crisis between the climate crisis, among others. How can we leave no trace in our world? How can we leave no trace at Burning Man? We have to, otherwise we don't get to come back, and it's a huge value. There's not people there to pick up after ourselves so much, and the ones that do leave marks, and we get bad feedback when we leave messes. The liminal web certainly, yeah, thinks about environmental stewardship and the interconnectedness. So here's just some Burning Man details about that. Participation is huge at Burning Man. There's the idea of no spectators, and liminal web embraces the importance of actively engaging with the world around us and participation in the co-creation of reality. We have the whole idea of volunteering is big. Immediacy is one of my favorites. I love the fact that we could just drop in and make things happen, and that no idea can substitute for this experience. Like, we learn, we grow from the felt senses and embodiment. It's not just heady stuff, and I love how embodied the liminal web is. I love things like what Seth has been offering around different musicality being, or the glass bead game, or any of the other psychotechnologies that are a part of Burning Man and of the liminal web. So, and then consent, it's not a formal principle, but it's huge and very important at Burning Man. Eventually it will become a principle, I would say. And we want to say yes to new friends and experiences and who you want to be, but you got to take care of yourself. You got to be sensitive to what your morals, your health, your well-being are needed to be at Burning Man. And so consent culture within metamodernity certainly is huge. And we have these ethics, these empathy and fluidity, and the transformation potential of ethical interactions. So that was a bunch of a big mouthful. I've been speaking a lot. I'd love to hear some reflections about these different things. What stood out to you the most? How do we see a bridge between Burning Man culture and metamodern culture in these realms?
I just wanted to share one thing that was coming up for me when you were going through them is how much burners or Burning Man in general, and we're talking about 80,000 people a year, so that's a fuck ton of people, really like celebrate and conform in some ways to these principles. Like, they're taken very, very seriously. People know what they are. They can list them off. People, quiz them about each other. Camps are responsible for mandating them. And that's one thing that I feel like the liminal web doesn't really have right now, is we don't really have any cohesive set of principles. Or, I mean, I guess Joe Lightfoot's liminal web article that came out like 3-4 years ago is maybe the closest to it. But there's not really any unified set of principles or values or ethics. And maybe that's okay and not necessary at this point in the liminal web's unfolding. But something that is great about Burning Man is that when there is something that is sort of agreed upon and it's concrete and You can talk about it, and it's also intellectually concise and clear. So it's not using a bunch of jargon words. It's not overly philosophical. It actually is reminding you of very real things that impact your day-to-day embodied lived experience. There's something about that that allows it to, like, you can like try it on and feel it and live into it as a way of being in the world. And it almost becomes its own worldview in a sense. Like Burning Man is its own worldview. It's not quite green, it's not quite orange, it's not quite teal, it's not quite turquoise, but it's kind of a little bit of all of them, and it's its own thing simultaneously. So that was what was coming up for me.
Yeah, Burning Man started in '86 at Baker Beach, California, and eventually they had to move out to the desert because it got too big for that. It wasn't until 2004, 18 years later, that these principles got created. So I'm not sure when we're saying metamodernity got started, but we're clearly not 18 years into metamodernity. So we've got some time, and we've got some opportunities to see what those principles want to be and how they want to change.
Something that's coming up for me out of this that's intriguing me is how these principles essentially act as a kind of minimum viable governance structure for organizing 80,000 people, which is quite remarkable. That like just 10 principles somehow, allows people to cohabit like in a way that I'm assuming, like I haven't been, but assuming is relatively problem-free. There's a curiosity for me of like, I'm wondering if either of you know the history of like what they did before and sort of why these things sort of emerged in the first place. Part of the curiosity there is like you can build community that's sort of vibe-based for a while or up to some side of size, I guess. But at some point it seems like there's a necessity to kind of concretize certain things. And I'm wondering, like, there was still probably thousands and thousands of people at Burning Man before 2004, but I'm just kind of curious if you know any of the history of like how that transition sort of happened.
I do. I'd love to speak a little bit to it. And you bring up a really great point. Like, how are 10 principles, 11 principles really able to contain governance, and why do these happen to work, and where else can they work? Because I don't know where else that happens. Even the Constitution is way bigger than this for the states or whatever it is. Although states are certainly a lot bigger. And the point I'll make also is that Burning Man culture has changed. When Burning Man first was going out to the desert in 88, 89, 90, they had a drive-by shooting range for stuffed animals. And you could get on your car and kind of be like riding shotgun for real and be shooting, trying to hit these things. Like, this does not happen anymore. This is not within the realm of safety or having 80,000, 60,000, even 40,000 people. I'm not sure when it stopped. So that's one of, and there were apparently other various more dangerous things happening there that have evolved out of Burning Man, and there's definitely a much more civilized or more civically responsible space. The other thing that's emerged is Burning Man has a ranger corps. It has group people who are there to help with conflict resolution. They're there to help keep people safe. They're there to help be sort of the police that are not police for the community that makes up Burning Man. So it doesn't just happen. Burning Man doesn't just run off of 10, 11 principles. It runs off of dedicated volunteers who are there to catch us when we need it and clean those up. And yeah, so the principles, actually, they didn't emerge from the main burn event. They emerged because there were all these sub-events, these regional burns that were happening out in out on the beaches of East Coast. Playa del Fuego is one of the first ones. Down in Texas at Flipside, and a few others that were seeking more framing and guidance, like what makes a gathering a burn, and who says, and we didn't want just anybody to go and use the word burner or Burning Man and create an event and say, oh, come out to my event, come out to my party, come out to my festival. It's a burn. We're going to burn the effigy and burn this van down. And you can, come do that. And we're going to have our own rules. Like, we're going to do whatever we want in that. Like, that could be a big problem for the image and make, risk the branding. So there actually is a whole IP, intellectual property team of lawyers at Burning Man that are out there policing the use of the man and language and so forth that protects our culture and stopping the commodification of it, and also stopping any kind of people that might use it in a way that would give people who don't know Burning Man or think about Burning Man or who have hippie trauma, as you might say, like a sense of, oh, this is not just a hippie gathering, this is a burn. I can count on some certain other cultural safety nets. I can count on some expectations of how I can interact. I can count on the fact there'll be rangers there. I can count on the fact that there'll be some other things built into it. And there's a whole way that events do get decertified if they're not behaving well. And it's happened, and they have coaching, and they have ways of healing them back to being certified again. But there is a brand for an event. So yeah, great question. Yeah, Ron.
Hey, Dal. Thanks for sharing all this. I'm curious, with your context of value alignment around these principles, when you think of disseminating it to the larger liminal web, how do you bind this to, let's say, a structural project? How do you bind this to some sort of tangible reality that kind of binds not only the values, but kind of a vision of shared bigness to kind of encourage effort and participation? I think from my observation in the liminal space, a lot of brilliant ideas, a lot of really fascinating minds, but there's a real kind of challenge in orienting around action. So when I kind of hear about core values and value-oriented groups, at least based on my personal trajectory, I always want to kind of dig a little bit deeper of like, how do you ground that in a systemic project? What are the deep kind of core things that bring you back to that keep people coming back, through the ups and the downs? Because I feel like sometimes, and I'll pause after this, the high level vibes is like a great start, but that's not the best social glue in times of strife and arbitration, right? Like, it can kind of disseminate a little bit there. So I'd love insights on that.
Can I take a first crack at that, Spacious?
Tucker.
Just one thing arose, which is that, I feel like putting in blood, sweat, and tears and time and energy is worth it if it's worth it. And so for Burning Man, you're doing that because you get to participate and co-create the best party in the world. And there's so many moments where you're like, fuck yeah, this was totally worth it. I would do this all over again, even though it was insanely difficult and is insanely difficult. Now, compare that to, say, an Integral conference, which I'm going to in a month from now. And you're at the Integral conference, you're in a hotel room with fluorescent lighting and kind of crappy food, and it's all overpriced, and you're kind of just like, yeah, it's fun to be around these people, but this isn't so great. And so when the next time they want to do an Integral conference and they're looking for volunteers, they have a really hard time finding people because you're kind of volunteering for a event. And so what I would just observe from my direct experience is that if you want people to show up and really work really, really hard, make it fucking awesome. Make it worth it. Like, make it super fucking sexy and amazing and memorable, and give people the experience of a lifetime. And more importantly, invite people to co-create that experience, because it's not like you're not showing up so someone can facilitate your experience. You're showing up so that you can all be in it together. Then I think that people will keep coming back year after year. What do you think, Daryl?
Yeah, they call it trauma bonding. There is this idea that Burning Man's a recreational disaster area or some other thing, which I know I get something out of. There is some way of I have a prepper side of me, and so I enjoy thinking about logistics. I enjoy thinking about contingencies, and I think a lot of that's not every burner. There's certainly plenty of other reasons to go, And there's other reasons why I'm not just out doing survivalist things. That's not really fun. I want to be around fun people. I want to be around art. I want to be around creativity. I want to be around whimsy and playfulness. So there is this kind of secret sauce mix of a lot of different worlds coming together that make one want to stay at Burning Man or not, or at least try it out and see, and then keep that around. And so yeah, does that answer your question, Ron? What else comes up for you in that?
Well, yeah, I appreciate the clarification, especially in the context. I've never been to Burning Man, but it sounds really rad. But I was just more curious because you had mentioned specifically, like, can it act as a framework for the larger liminal web outside of Burning Man, right? So to Tucker's point, like, I completely get the context of, like, we're going to create this incredible experience, right? It's going to be this mind-blowing thing. And the values, I think, are, at least it sounds like, from a layperson's perspective, deeply entrenched in that experience. It's like a very central aspect of the totality of, like, what you're doing. But you also take into context that everything we do in the liminal space won't be a Burning Man scale event or party, and there's like actual work to do in terms of, if we're organizing this, let's say, we can imagine the context. So I'll provide it's under the context of, like, we want more people to participate, right? We want to live that value of inclusivity to the means where it's not just those of us who are fortunate enough to be in this space in the immediate present, but also recognizing there's hundreds of millions, if not billions, who don't have the capacity to participate in this. So how do we extend it to them? That's kind of what I mean by when I talk more about a structural orientation, is like, how do we translate it outside of that? And that may or may not be relevant to the talk. So full disclosure, right? Like, I just, was just kind of connecting the dots between you saying, like, oh, this is a really ideal learning and experience, and you want to kind of spread it throughout beyond it, it seems like. So that's kind of where I was pulling on, but I'll kind of pause.
Yeah, this is where I want to go with this, and I actually have a couple of slides made up around what would a proto be theme camp at Burning Man be, but I want to address all the things you mentioned first, about, like, is Burning Man itself really the best place to try to as a launching pad for some other community? Maybe, maybe not. Burning Man is a bougie event. There is a certain cost. There is a lot of things you need to have to stay safe and protected and be able to go. Yes, there's low income tickets. Yes, there's some ways that people can go without as much money. There are some people who are working staff or volunteering at such a level that they are getting free tickets. But not everybody can. Many people can't go. And most events sell out. Most of the regionals sell out. Most of the and Burning Man certainly has been selling out for the past 12 years, I want to say now. To that end, there are a lot of other ways that building a theme camp and using different experiments in that may point to some new things around exploring. So I'll go through some of these real quick, and we can see how they land. We can play with things like holacracy or sociocracy or liquid democracy to make decisions. How do camps make their decisions? How do people lead? Are there floating hierarchies? And different camps try different things, and some work better, some work different based on the people that are coming and the theme that is part of it. Certainly, there's a lot of work around regenerative practices at Burning Man. A lot of solar experiences with all the sun that's out there anyways. Composting is a big thing at Burning Man. And Burning Man actually has a whole groups of sustainability and works hard to promote that. And there's a whole village called Alternative Energy Village that has wind, has other forms, and then just using biodiesel, that kind of thing is an experimenting point for the generators that are fossil fuel based. Certain places workshops on that. Adaptive structures. How do we create social structures that are inclusive, ensuring accessibility? There's a lot of work around accessibility at Burning Man, between having fun art cars that that give people mobility, to, there's at least 5 different deaf camps, and that's just to name a few realms of accessibility in this. Adaptive spaces, we set everything up in less than a week, and we take it all down. And that's a fun place to experiment and see how to make things. And that's allowed different camps to do other disaster response. A whole thing called Burners Without Borders started up after Hurricane Katrina. And that allowed for burners to do disaster relief, because we are kind of good at that in ways. Other kinds of communication stuff, hackathons could happen. Artistic expression is going to be huge for naming a culture and keeping that social cohesion happening through the art that gets created, and storytelling, and all the other forms that want to happen, the music, the architecture, and so forth. Wellness and personal development is a big theme at some camps. There's also places for meditation, media, and dialogue around personal and collective growth that happens at Burning Man. A lot of great connections happen in those realms. Consent and communication workshops, certainly also huge there. Alternative economic models don't happen quite as much, but there's already Burning Man's kind of has an alternative economic model, the gift economy, and different ways that can be instantiated. And then how does the feedback happen? How do people integrate what they've learned for the next year? So I'll stop there and get some feedback on this.
I just want to double down a little bit on what I was saying earlier, and just to say that all of those things are happening in many different places. Like there's an eco village that's about 45 minutes from where I am right now in North Carolina, and they're doing a lot of the things that were on that list, but what they're maybe not doing with as much I don't know, diversity or intensity is just like creating magic and creating state experiences and creating the sort of the extraordinary, and creating a place for like a very sort of surreal, mystical experience that almost feels like a dream when you're in it, and it certainly feels like a dream when you're remembering it. And so I would just say that like all of those things are only sort of in a way possible to really be with in a full way when they're sort of contextualized in a container of magic and ritual and play and celebration and like extraordinary moments of healing and ways of being in intimacy with ourselves, with other humans, with nature, with art, in ways that just I haven't experienced in other places on the planet at this time. And so, yeah, I just want to, I guess there's just something that feels important for me in saying like, there's so much oversaturation, even in the liminal web, with in-person gatherings and different workshops, and everyone has a coach and everyone is offering, different masterclass and stuff like that. And it's like, how can we bring more that Burning Man sort of essence of like the magic and the ritual and the service and the showing up and all of those things, and the tradition and the yearly ritual aspect of it and the emergent evolutionary aspect of it, and kind of bring that into a really, really special experience. And I feel like the more that we can do that, then the more there's like room for people to experiment and play with these other types of structures and ways of being that can evolve our larger systems as well.
Yeah, I've heard of a number of different intentional communities that have emerged from Burning Man camps, or groups of friends that have created things here and there. Glad to hear these are happening. Ziptie, you got any reflections on any of this?
I guess I'm just listening to orient myself in the dialogue and what can be relevant. One thing that I probably have attended fewer in-person meetings and experiences, with the exception of Burning Man. And I think also I'm adjacent to other communities such as the rationalists, the effective altruists, and the what they call like the teapots, right? That's part of Twitter / in-group. So I think that it's a slight different community or like set of communities that I'm in. And one of the things that I have noticed is that meaning making and a high effect and flow and what we're looking for, right? With the exception perhaps of magic, that can be done kind of remotely. You have a sense of a community that can be fostered by digital methods, etc., where you kind of you're decentralized. But what I resonate deeply with is what Tucker describes as this, these magical moments, right? These kind of emergent, almost like spiritual, experiences that truly require some kind of physicality, right? Like some kind of direct experience in our bodies, in the moment, the face-to-face interaction with other people and nature. And so I guess my biggest reflection is, in our decentralized world in which we all think about scale and like technology to bring about, meaning and magic and purpose, I increasingly think that it's almost impossible for us to inherit these physical bodies and these kind of very biological features, our hardware that's been designed, by adaptation, right, over tens of thousands of years, that we will never get to a state, perhaps, in which we get these deeply meaningful experiences of magic and community and healing, ecstasis and catharsis and communitas, without gathering on the ground in the moment in the place. Anyway, that's things that just came up for me. And maybe just a quick follow on this, which is the part of the magic of Burning Man is this almost like geographical attraction where of this vast land and also the space, the time, right? It's always in the end of August, right? Everyone can put it in their calendar as if Christmas celebrations or religious festivals. So it's anchored in a time and space, and it's a cycle. It's an experience that happens every year, and so it has this like huge attractive energy as an attractor that brings people together, geographically and also in time, and perhaps that's also something that we should, or we as the liminal community or whatever, can learn from it, which is a certain type of traditional ritual that is repeating in a certain type of steady fashion to have this attraction. Thought.
A liminal pilgrimage. That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Yeah. Lisa, are we gonna share something?
Yeah, building on what Simon just said, I was reading this exchange between Victor and you, Tucker, in the chat here about if collapse were to happen. And I was thinking along similar lines, what are those certain temporal or other constraints, urgencies that tend to foster those kinds of deep bonds and ceremonial, sacred, and life-shifting experience. And I was reminded of this group. So in that sense, I think it would be really interesting to see a pop-up proto-B at Burning Man, if it was interestingly constrained. I'm popping this example in the chat, the Chaos Pilots in Denmark. Some of you might know of their work. They it might have some of the features of the burner responders that I think Daryl was referencing. I can't remember the term that you used, but anyway, they kind of deploy wherever fun, magic, and assistance is needed. Yeah, very much like Burners Without Borders. They were probably inspired by Burning Man. So just to share that example.
One thing tonally that sometimes feels different for me between the Liminal Web and Burning Man, if we're going to talk about vibes, is that often in the Liminal Web, even some of the Limicon sessions I've been a part of, there's sort of still a more, I would call it kind of like a green worldview, sort of remnants of sort of like a kind of gentle and sort of yin and pretty feminine, kind of like waiting for people to step up and volunteer. And there's a lot of receptivity, a lot of spaciousness, a lot of silence, and these are all really beautiful things that I love. One thing that I really enjoyed about like being at Camp Contact, for example, is someone goes up and they're like, "The tent is falling down. I need 3 volunteers now. 1, 2, 3, let's go!" And you know, it's like it's much more like military almost in a way, but it's from a place of love, but it's also a place of like actual real world concrete urgency, not like let's be in spacious awareness and see what arises. And like, oh, it's an image of an elephant. How do we want to be with this? Oh, this is, you know, it's like, you just got to kind of get to the fucking point. And sometimes there's space for all the full range of experiences. But I think that there's something really healthy about like integrating in or sort of earlier structures of consciousness into these you know, later ways of perceiving reality, which is to like bring back in the actual concrete act of doing something that has some urgency and requires coordination without philosophizing about it in the moment. You know, it's like the meta reflective capacity kind of doesn't, it's not really that useful because you just kind of gotta like do the dishes in the next 10 minutes and then get on your way. And there's something about that it also induces a sense of flow state, but it's like a flow state, like it's kind of coming from a different direction. And I think a lot of the world sort of operates mostly in that, on that spectrum. But maybe in the Liminal Web, we're kind of slightly more disconnected from it.
Yeah. Fascinating points. 2 things that I wanted to mention. One, zip tie, Simon, I heard you mention a lot of like burner or liminal adjacent groups that you're part of, and yeah, I'm hopeful that they also will find homes at Burns to offer. Maybe they already there, the rationalists, the teapot, and so forth, different groups I don't know much about, but think they've got a lot of insights. And we also know that a lot of our kind of liminal web heroes, such as Liv Boree, presents at Burning Man and does great stuff with it at different camps and hosting them. So there's definitely a sense that these things are happening there. The second point I was wanting to make was yeah, I don't know, it'll come to me. So yeah. Oh yes, the other camp that I wanted to name, there's a group called Vibe Camp that specifically has Vibe as its jam, and there's a lot of rationalists and different Twitter friends that are joining there from the Teapot group and so on. And they are sort of a cross between a burn and a festival. There's definitely less about the build and the less about the disaster. They have more comfortable spaces and generally stay in cabins, but they have the pop-upness of Burning Man. They have the open space of events spontaneously being led, and a lot of new forms of workshoppings of knowledge that is not really available on the internet, or not really available in different places that is taught, whether it's crafts or psychology or we spaces, that sort of thing. And they do embrace the whole connective desire amongst each other in that, and they'll be doing their own thing for Eclipse called Vibe Eclipse down in Austin.
I was curious to bring a topic to the group and source people's desires and people's curiosities. I've had a few friends, we've kicked around the idea of creating a Metamodern festival, and I feel a little split about it because on the one hand, to have our own space, our own time, and just do something for the Liminal Web community seems really cool. Also really hard because we'd have to do everything from scratch and invite in in order to really do a festival, there needs to be at least a couple hundred people there in order for it to have that festival feel. And because like part of a festival is that there's many things happening at once. And so that's what's cool, is that it kind of it's like this constant emergent flow state, and you're inside of the art piece as it's being created through you and around you. And that's hard to do when there's only 50 people or 10 people. I mean, you can still have that sort of like vantage point way of perceiving reality, but it's a different experience. And so I guess another possibility is to just like really work hard and like really heavily advertise the Metamodern Magicians Camp at Camp Contact for like a solid year, maybe even 2 years out, and like make there be a Liminal Web festival like Limicon, but in person at Burning Man under Camp Contact. And that way it's also in a way more true to reality, because it's like we're integrated into all the other chaos of the rest of the Burning Man world, while also kind of needing like allowing there to be a sense of a tribe that forms and can have its experiences with each other in our tribe-like way, but then also integrate and also invite others into the experience. So I'm just curious what maybe for those on the call, what feels more exciting or personally enlivening for you to have there be like a one-off type of a festival that's somewhere else, or to come to Burning Man and have it be as part of a larger context?
The second idea really excited me. Something that I struggle with sometimes around the liminal web related things is there's such a pull for me about investing in my like region, my area, and so much of us are just in such disparate parts of the world. And at the same time, when I do a lot of investment in the area, I end up feeling a kind of loneliness that I only get met here. And so I kind of oscillate between like trying to like get more people into the community and or just like kind of like staying inside the community, or trying to keep like just I don't know, let go of the community as a whole and trying to like meet myself through the rest of the world. And one of the things I really like about the second idea that you posited there was that, I mean, there's many facets of my identity that aren't really like that can be met in many other places than the liminal web. But there's maybe a few, which I'm not actually really sure what they are, that can only be met in it. And so like being able to go to something like Burning Man, where there's just a billion different, identities to go play in, while still anchoring within whatever is here in this liminal thing. That feels really neat. And then also providing like one of the aspects, there's a kind of evangelist quality to what I want out of the liminal web. I want it to grow. I want more people to be coming in. I want this meme to spread. And so by putting it inside this thing that has so much exposure and contact to other people, I think that would be like kind of checking every box, other than the fact that I don't live very close and I don't have any money. So other than that, like I'd be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I'd love to see a Metamodern Liminal Web Festival. There's certainly other gatherings in nature's Brandon's Metamodern Spirituality retreat is nice in that there's a lot of nature. You're in bunk beds on that land, and that creates a nice space. But it's small. I don't think he wants to get much bigger than 30 or 40 people. But yeah, what would Metamodern sound camp look like? What would a Metamodern, who would come play music there? What kind of art might come to a Metamodern space? And how would workshops be different in a festival scene as opposed to online, or as opposed to what Emerge was, or something like that, if we're out in nature? Comes to mind. Maybe you thought about that, Tucker. or others?
Well, what I was just thinking with Michael is that it might be interesting to plan for 2025 starting now, basically get like 10 teachers on that can be speaking. They can have like prime speaking slots at the Metamodern Magicians Camp, which obviously the public could be invited into. And then there could also be facilitators that are brought on to curate certain events that could be either closed for just the pod or for the larger burner community, and then basically like invite in 100 and like make it like 150 is the max number of people and make it its own camp. And then maybe we can get funders that can allow for scholarships for people that don't have as much income. And so maybe there's someone that could help compensate, offset some of the costs for some of the people, and like make a brand new website, make it look really slick. And it's kind of like its own event that's happening inside of the Burning Man experience. Because a lot of people want to come to Burning Man, and I think they kind of feel a little skeptical. They're not, maybe like I wouldn't want to go, for example, if I didn't know anyone else that was going. I would feel like all alone in the sea of 80,000 people. And so to know that there's like 100 other people going from this larger world, many of whom I've met, online, that would make me much more excited to participate.
Lisa, you're on mute. Yeah.
Question for you, Daryl. You mentioned that there were several intentional communities that sprouted up as based in the philosophy of Burning Man.
Yes.
Has anybody ever collected any stories or data? I'd love to learn more about where those are and what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that anybody's done the research on that. I can, point to a few down in Costa Rica. So there's a Protopian Convergence that Danny Bell runs. That Danny Bell certainly is a big community organizer. Helps run the Decentral camp at Burning Man, and she's actually created a burn out of it. She's also got a community going there. Blue Morpho was another camp that, or another community that ran, that came out of EBGB Healers. I hear it's since shut down due to the pandemic. Okay, Tucker knows about one. And yeah, and so the other thing that there's this concept of burner group houses. I live in one. I live in the Glow House here in DC, and we are not all burners per se, but we all are burner friendly, burner adjacent, and host burner events here and there. And typically any major metropolitan area has these conglomerations of fellow burners that want to live and share space together, whether it's in the city or out in the country.
The other thing that I really have, I've only been a Burning Man twice, so I'm still very new to the whole world. I also dated someone for a year who was a very serious burner. And so I got to kind of enter into the burning culture pretty quickly because of her. And the thing that I would love more of the Liminal Web to offer is this sense of like, you could travel to anywhere in the world pretty much, and you kind of meet if I'm in the Netherlands, I meet the 2 or 7 people that are in the Liminal Web, and that somehow there's sort of a directory. But then also when we meet each other, there's this sort of shared resonance without needing to do anything, without even needing to know each other's names. It's like, oh, you're in the Liminal Web as well. And it's just kind of like this, the nervous system relaxes a little bit. There's already a greater depth of intimacy. And that's something that I think burners do really, really well, is that there's this shared experience that creates a bond right immediately, knowing that you're talking to another burner.
Yeah, and I think we share that as liminal space people. I know when I meet some other liminal people, that bond is even stronger at this point in my life, where it's like, oh wow. And I can remember when I first started burning in 2004, it was like, oh, you're a burner. I'm like, wow, this is great. And eventually it starts to differentiate, but those principles are powerful tools. Rossi or Victor, are you coming up with anything from this? Anything resonating for you, or curiosities coming up for you in this?
Did you say my name?
Yeah, I did, Rossi. Just curious if you have.
Thank you. I'm en route, so it's a little bit loud, but I'm appreciating the discussion. I just wanted to name that for about 10 years in Chicago, there was an event, conscious dance event, that was based on the principles of Burning Man, but only kind of like the spiritual aspect. And it was a very magical event. It's no more, which is very saddening. And yeah, it's making me think why that is. Like why actually there's like not a more proliferation of such spaces actually kind of post-pandemic, at least like where I am, because there was a very vibrant community like from like 2008 to 2018, but yeah, it kind of like dissipated. So I'm pondering that. Thank you for the discussion.
Thanks, Rossi.
One thing I wanted to share is I went to Borderland in Sweden a couple of years ago, and Borderland is a burner regional in Scandinavia. And I was really impressed with these young people my age that were all very metamodern informed and actually using something like the Listening Society and the metamodern worldview, and more impressively, the metamodern or Web3 type technology and sort of decentralized ways of voting and different types of holacracy and things that honestly go over my head because I'm not so deep into the DAOs and the tech space. But it seems just really, really promising to see the leadership. And I went to some of their meetings where the leadership were sort of running the meetings, and there was something about it that just felt different. It was just like, I don't know how to quite put it into words. It was just like, oh, this is a shape of consciousness that is sort of humming in a new way that I don't experience at eco villages or other types of collectives. So the Scandinavians, they know where it's at. And they started as running festivals, and then now I think they're building out an art sculpture garden that will be open to the public throughout the rest of the year in order to raise capital to help fund the festival. And then eventually they're going to start building on land and starting more of an intentional community. So I think they're also approaching the financial aspect and the sustainability aspect, both of the land that they purchase, but then also the financial sustainability of creating more longer lasting collectives in a really interesting way.
One remark from my end. One thing that I have noticed is a lot of value can be added to a community to simply provide kind of navigation or guidance for people who are kind of encountering the community first, maybe in a talk at Burning Man or an article or reading some of the books, etc. is almost like, is there not a definite but some kind of almost comprehensive guide to what are the a reading list and a list of communities that we just collected. You just, I think, especially you just mentioned, like when I'm traveling around, I meet people. Like, where do I find the communities and the people? And so I think one I think simple quote unquote project for people who are deep into this space is to just simply start that Airtable or that Google Docs or whatever of that, and I think that's a great super low effort community building exercise. Just a thought. This doesn't quite fit into anything you just said, sorry. But yeah.
I was thinking the same thing earlier. And I guess maybe Daryl can speak to this better than I can, but my understanding of the burner culture is sort of like, that's a great idea. Do you want to do it? Like, who's going to do it? It sounds like you're volunteering, Simon. Do I hear a volunteer? You're going to make an Airtable for the Liminal Web?
So it's actually true. So what so one of my long-term projects is what I call like deeper living, which essentially is, it's more like it's more like a collection of, psychotechnologies themselves, like what are some of the mechanisms, from ecstatic dance to playfulness to art, etc., that that you can try out and experiment with in order to live deeper. So maybe that's an adjacent project. I don't think I'm like deep enough in the liminal web specifically. I'm still trying to get my bearings, honestly. Tucker, I think you might be the centerpiece of it, honestly, from what I've heard.
Well, I think I could map a section of it, but feel quite disconnected from another section. But yeah, I think that there's something. The thing that I really appreciate is the be the change you want to see in the world type of mentality of like mommy and daddy aren't here to do this for us. So like if we want to see something in the world, it's almost stopping projecting that power out onto the president or onto
Right.
our parents or onto our teachers or our elders or something. And it's like, well, I guess we could do it. I guess I could do it. And
Agreed.
if I don't know how to do it, I guess I could speak it and ask for help. And so like that's another thing that Burning Man has really helped me get excited about. And whatever, these are all just my own little quirks that probably speak more to my shadow than anything else. But one thing that I noticed is that sometimes people can complain. They could be like, I don't really like the way that this Zoom session was facilitated. And it's like, okay, like, thanks for the feedback. That's cool. That's helpful. Like, but another way to be it is like, hey, I would like to see more. I would like to see breakout rooms. Can we please I would like to propose that we do a 10-minute breakout room so we can get to know each other in more intimate groups. And there's like a very specific or sort of like a tangible ask that can proactively kind of create something without sort of just like bringing the complaining energy, but then it doesn't really. But then another thing is like sometimes we just don't know. And so we could ask for support, and that can be really helpful. It's like, hey, I'm feeling that something is off. I don't quite know what it is, and I would love for someone to help support that. Excuse me. I feel like I sort of rushed through what I just said, and I'm not sure if I hit the main points, but I think you guys get the gist. So it's like, how can we as liminal web beings kind of be full, independent, sovereign beings that take responsibility for our experience, but then also know that we're contextually created in every moment, and that we can ask for support, we can lean on each other, we can share ideas, and we can be co-creative partners in our collective experience as well.
Yes.
Kind of just chime in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Darryl.
No, please go ahead on.
Oh, okay. Just kind of chime in. Tucker, what you're saying really resonates with me. I personally believe, I know it's not for everyone, but I do believe that the DAO infrastructure kind of solves a lot of these problems if it's set up correctly, both for accountability, responsibility, most importantly, access and agency within the organization. And I think what's really ideal with the structure is it allows people to kind of, there's no set way of governance, right? Like, so different pods, different working groups can govern themselves as they see fit. And that's kind of like a core kind of cultural competency that allows many people to kind of come in. But Tucker, to your core point, it doesn't solve the problem. This is something I'm personally grappling with in our community of like, proactive agency. So you come in, you attend meetings, you see things you don't like, but all you say is, I don't like this, right? Well, what's the alternative? Like, what are you imagining? And what are you, more importantly, what are you willing to do? Because I'll champion you, right? But it's not I think we're still in the challenge where it's like, I feel like there's almost like an enjoyment of it occupying the problem space for as long as possible. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for our shared understanding. But I'll just share if it's of interest, and not to kind of dissuade, but if any of you are interested in DAO stuff, I'll share Spirit DAO's documentation. Everything we've built is public, so it's free. You can fork it. It's not like you have to do Spirit DAO if that's not your vibe. But everything we've done, you can build yourself at no cost because all the protocols are free. So if it's of interest, I really just believe it's the ideal structure to kind of organize what is a common theme in the Liminal Web, is this greater sense of like organization and infrastructure to kind of do the things and do them in a way that are meaningful, impactful, and allow people to kind of act in their own direction. So big fan of the DAO space, but we'll pause there.
I love what you shared, Ron, and it reminds me of what Simon was saying about being in person. Like, if you're not really digging something online, you can just leave the Zoom room, or you can just swipe right or something, and we can just kind of, which is fine. That's a beautiful thing. That's a privilege, actually, in a way. But there's something about being in person when you're sharing a tent in 100-degree weather in a tent, and there's a dust storm, and there's 10 people around you, and you're kind of triggered by that one person from yesterday, and it's like, you kind of, you just got to kind of work through it.
And there's this very beautiful aspect of like contribution and co-creation, right? You're always you're always a consumer and a producer at the same time. You're never just a spectator. You participate, but you also bring to the player, you gift. And so I think what brings that up for me, and talking about your DAO kind of infrastructure, is I'm really fascinated by spaces that can be created with like a minimum viable bureaucracy, right? So just the outlines. What is required, almost like what's the catalyst or the oil in, the engine. What can we provide, for example, that motivates and catalyzes people to contribute, to co-create, to organize, etc. And I think the answer is, for example, governance structure. And by the way, the answer is, I think, also principles that you mentioned earlier, Daryl. I think principles, intentions are wonderful. You don't set goals, you don't set results or outputs, right? You set intentions, and you frame a container in which magic can happen, and then you let the participants live and experiment and give and contribute. So I can just stop here. I guess that's something that, also thinking about, I have this very economic thinking, which is obviously clashes with with a lot of these principles. But one of my core beliefs I still have is like, what are some small things that have an outsized impact, right? What are some minimal things that you contribute? And I think this creating navigation, as I mentioned earlier, creating principles, and also creating containers and governance systems, and then invite great people, and let the magic happen. That's what I find fascinating.
I think your economic sensibilities are needed and desired, and I would welcome them wholeheartedly in this realm. I think a lot about what are the other forms of capital besides financial capital, just social capital, gift capital, artistic capital, health capital, playfulness capital, like mental health capital. Like, how do we optimize on these things in spaces, and how do we not let the GDP or the efficiency of production get in the way? So we still need to optimize. We need these other attractors, like Daniel Schmachtenberger says, and we'll just be a bunch of hippies, like, not going anywhere if we don't. And so let's have wise hippies. Let's have financial, or have game theoretic hippie conversations in this, because that's how we'll do a lot of good stuff. And that's what this World Wide Web and a lot of other metamodern groups are trying to create. That were presented at Limicon recently. And the nice thing is, Burning Man gives us these tasks, these opportunities to create. And so having a minimum viable bureaucracy then allows for the art or whatever else to emerge. And when it's somebody else's idea, or when it's your own idea, and you see that opportunity, you get really excited to create it. And you're like, but if you're just in the default world and you've got licenses to get, or you've got hoops to, much more bureaucracy to deal with. And then you've got to get some payoff. You've got to convince some investors, any of that stuff. It's frustrating. And it stifles creativity. It stifles opportunity. And yeah, Spirit, I see Ron nodding. Like, this is where Spirit DAO the Ethereum frameworks allow for are another form of a minimum viable bureaucracy that allow for some great and some really problematic things to emerge.
One thing I was just coming up for me is around the mythology of Burning Man, because it's such a cultural phenomenon at this point that it's taken on a trillion lives of its own. And yesterday or a couple nights ago, I was at a dinner party and someone was asking what metamodernism is and or what the meta crisis is rather. And it was interesting because me and the guy I was next to, we both gave totally 100% valid and I would say good responses. But they are wildly different. And in a way, that's kind of great because there's so many different frames that we can hold simultaneously. I think that's one of the values of the shared values that people in the liminal web celebrate. And on the other hand, it would be interesting to create some sort of documentary or like a book or some sort of co-created experiential art piece that could tell the mythology of the liminal web as a living organism that is being created in the moment that it's being spoken. So it's not like it's a finished thing. It's more of like a living story that also can take on a form that can be shared with others. And maybe the best way to do that is through people's direct experience. And when they go home from Burning Man and they, talk to their cousin or their neighbor and they're like, I just went to this crazy thing and the thing happened and blah, 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 and it's like that energy and that joy and that sort of dumbfounded, mysterious awe that is so common, it becomes infectious and like the energy becomes the story itself. And it almost takes on this like mythological quality I've noticed. And so just thinking about the liminal web and like, what is this, how can we create an experience that can create an embodied story that sort of naturally arises as a shape of energy that then becomes infectious in a way, and people want to taste or smell or touch whatever that is.
So something like what you just said, Tucker, is weaving something I was with from your points earlier about the tension of like, I want something, let me just go do it. And like one of the places I get to often is like, I see a million things that I want, and I can't obviously do all of them. And one of the feelings that's been most, like one of the things that's attracted me most to the liminal web has been a sense of like finding the others. It's like, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. Someone else is doing that. Like, I remember having this very visceral sense the first time I met my friend who was a university professor teaching her students like wisdom practices and connection practices. And my body just like let out this massive sigh of relief of like, I don't have to do that anymore. And where am I trying to go with this? Like, I still don't really know what this liminal web thing is. And I've been exploring and trying to understand for a while now. And there's something about it that's kind of like vibe based, that both like makes it really hard and really necessary to like have these kinds of concrete artifacts. And like I'm sensing like a lot of we're wrestling a lot with this during Limicon, which is itself kind of like an artifact and something that's concrete and also something that isn't anything. And I don't know if I'm really going anywhere other than like there's this tension that I'm finding in every one of these conversations like this that ends up, I feel like, immobilizing the conversation most of the time. And like I'm not really sure how to get beyond that. But I think that's actually the tension I'm in right now. It's like I both want more structure and don't. And like I don't know how to reconcile that.
Lisa,
I'd like to build on that. I think it was Ron who said we have a certain perverse attraction to racing to occupy the complaining position or the problem position. And I'm thinking about safety first, safety third, comes out of this radical self-responsibility. And what is it, is there really a meta crisis, or are we just addicted to occupying the problem position, or are we generating the meta crisis by our focus on the meta crisis? But it does intrigue me, what would be a minimally creative, generative set of constraints for collapse simulation? Playful, fun, glorious, delirious collapse simulation, because if any of those galaxy brains are right, we might be playing for real sooner than we think. So I'm really attracted to something that would galvanize the time together and lend meaning and depth to the experience.
what would the 80,000 person escape room look like?
Well, that's what happened with the flood this year.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think of that. I mean, that's why I thought of it though. Yeah.
It's interesting because I watched this TV series. It's based off a book called Station 11. Has anyone seen Station 11? It's really good. It's about this post-apocalyptic film that I haven't, I don't remember watched many of those, but they film it in 3 timelines that are all interwoven. The time of the collapse, 5 years later and 20 years later. And what comes out of 20 years post global collapse is more or less Burning Man camps that are sort of living. It's about a traveling Shakespeare play, so a lot of it is around art and creativity and community and kind of coming together with little tribes. And there's different tribes in the surrounding area that different people go to, and there's some, there's tension and whatnot. But it's yeah, it's just a TV show, but it's also, to me, it was a very there seems to be a deeper impulse or trust in me, and I imagine in many people, to put ourselves in these types of simulations like you're pointing to, Lisa, because there's some sort of like deep warning that might not even play out in our lifetimes, but maybe it's a deeper warning that can be passed down to the next generation.
I want to just comment real briefly, because 2 things you said really resonated with me, and this may be a controversial opinion, but I don't feel like, I know there's some people in the space, some influential people, who are very big in like embracing collapse as committed to history, as opposed to a possibility. And I think we want to reject that framework because it's not 100%. Like the future is unknown, right? We don't know that. And I think that's a very defeatist, almost escapism attitude that I think it can in many ways be, I mean, for some it'd be a catalyst for action, I think, but we have to be very careful about that being a central philosophy, because that's a huge source of nihilism, I think, that could spring up. So we have to be careful there. But to your point about the crisis, right? I think in many ways we have to conceptualize the crisis as like a trajectory, right? So path of least resistance. It's like if nothing changes, the systems themselves will organize. It has nothing to do with any individual. Just the institutions are going to kind of bring it. But I just want to kind of bring that up because I was actually reading, I think it was Joe Brewer who wrote a recent article about like accepting collapse as inevitable. And I just think that that's a very, very dangerous path. And more importantly, the future is unknown. It's not real. Like we don't know that yet. I think any known future is technically past. So until that comes to be, I think we want to push back on the idea of embracing it as a certainty.
Michael asks if we could share a little more about the flood or the rainstorms. I'll just name that Burning Man happens on a dried out lake bed that does have water on it in the wintertime, as I understand it. And like a lake bed that does have water and you step in it, like it becomes muddy fast. There's not a hard surface when a lot of water is put onto it. And so I wouldn't say it was so much of a flood directly, but it was this lake bed that was became unstable. So anytime rain happens at Burning Man, which has happened before, but not to the extent it happened this past year, 2023, all traffic has to stop because driving on it gets you stuck. You can't ride bikes on it, and you sink and you build up a thick layer, and you get 2 or 3 inches taller as you walk around if you have the right shoes on, the boots that will like collect it. So this happened at the beginning of the event. We couldn't arrive to build as soon as we wanted to because the roads were shut down. And then it happened again on Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, which is when the man typically burns and when the temple burns on Saturday and Sunday. And it changed a lot of things. A lot of events got canceled. People had to just stay in place. And there wasn't a lot of certainty about when things would open up again, because even though the rain stops, it takes about a day and a half to be able to actually be driving again, moving around. So camps started hunkering down, and we had to have disaster preparedness meetings, disaster meetings to change our plans. And the main burn and the main and the temple burn got postponed until Monday night and Tuesday night, respectively. Overall, I think the burners handled it well. If not their first rodeo, there's always something that happens at Burning Man, whether it's some sort of cicada or some sort of windstorm or any other number of things that happen either on the way to or at the event. Yeah, it was just a rough take of it. I'd love to hear what Tucker stood up for him in it.
Yeah, actually, what was interesting is that it was like Burning Man experienced the collapse situation, essentially, where everything shut down, everyone was forced into place. And what I experienced, my personal, one thing is there's like 80,000 experiences that are happening simultaneously. So it's hard to make any definitive statements around it. But what my experience was that I was in a tent with maybe 20 other people. And basically we had like a 6-hour song circle. It was one of the most beautiful days of my life. We just were singing all different types of songs from all different types of genres. Lisa, our friend Sean Gregory was there. And it was just this magical day. And then what happened is the next couple of days, like it became much more neighborhoody because you couldn't ride the bikes. So the whole Burning Man became kind of geographically centered, and so you would go to the local sound camp or you'd walk to the nearby places, and there became a lot more intimacy, and you really got to kind of know your neighbors in a way that I don't think ever would have happened had people had access to bikes where they could be much more free roaming. So in a way, it's like that was a simulation inside of a simulation of what a collapse scenario might look like, which is kind of interesting. Also holding what you say, Ron, is I resonate with your perspective on all of that, and
Oops, I think we lost Tucker somehow. So anyways, thank you everybody for staying for this event, and look forward to having additional conversations around this realm. And looking forward to being at Burning Man this year and other events. Please reach out to me at dance@campcontact.org if questions. And we'll see you at the burn.